Hello everyone. I welcome you all for today's RoHS webinar session. So before we dive into the main webinar, we have a few housekeeping information. All attendees are muted by default to minimize any background noise. We absolutely encourage your participation. If you have any questions, feel free to enter it in the comment box. We will get back to you in the end of the session, and your answer will also be answered in the email. After the webinar, a short feedback survey will appear. Kindly take 2 minutes and provide the feedback, which will help us improve our future sessions better to your needs. Also, the session is being recorded. If you have opted, you will receive a recording as well. Here is a bit about API engineering. With over 25 years of industry experience, we serve clients across US, EU, and APAC regions. We also ISO 27001, 9001, and TISAC certified, proudly supporting a global customers base of around 400 plus organizations. And here is a quick overview of how we operate across 4 major services, which are compliance, helping navigate and stay aligned with evolving global regulations, engineering division providing innovative and cost-effective design solutions, sourcing division offers access to high-quality suppliers and components, and last but not the least, cataloging division, which is organizing a product and data for streamlined management. In compliance, we offer services and turnkey solutions for the regulations mentioned here, such as REACH, TSCA, RoHS, and many. Also, we deliver end-to-end compliance solutions covering over 70 plus global regulations. Currently, we are proudly working with 12 major OEMs and over 150 Tier 1 and Tier 2 suppliers globally, and helping them to stay compliant across global regulations. Now let us introduce our speakers for today's session. We have Impana TN. She is part of our regulatory compliance team with several years of experience in global environmental regulations. She is specialized in monitoring regulatory developments and supporting organizations in navigating compliance requirements. We also have Pavitra Shekhar. She is an engineer and part of our regulatory compliance team with 4 years of experience. She is specialized in monitoring global regulations and supporting organizations in understanding and complying with evolving regulatory requirements. So I'll head over to Pavitra. Pavitra, please take.
Thank you, Asha. So, good day, everyone. I'm Pavitra, and I work as a regulatory compliance engineer. I'm excited to share insight with you today and learn from the discussion as well. Thank again for being here. I'm delighted to welcome you all to today's webinar. I promise this session will be insightful and it's interactive. Our focus today is on navigating the 2025 RoHS amendments. Today, I will be taking through the recent RoHS amendments, what's changing, and what that means for us for a compliance and product perspective. So today's agenda for this webinar is introduction of RoHS, RoHS Directive overview, recent amendments, industry impact, compliance strategies, key deadlines and its action items, and turning compliance into opportunity and its key takeaways. Moving to the next slide. So here is our introduction of RoHS. So before we get into the details, I just want to set the context. Most of us here are already familiar with RoHS, but just to level set, RoHS stands for Restriction of Hazardous Substances. It's a European directive that restricts certain hazardous materials in electrical and electronic products. The goal of this webinar is to help you clearly understand the key RoHS amendments that took effect in 2025 and what they mean for your organization. We will focus on identifying where compliance risks typically exist, which type of products are most likely to be affected, and how exemption changes may impact current designs. Another important objective is preparation. Many companies run into issues not because RoHS requirements are unclear, but because they react too late. We want to help you prepare clearly, understand upcoming deadlines, and avoid last-minute redesigns, shipment delays, or market access disruptions. So today what I want to do is quickly revisit the basics of RoHS, talk through high risk substances, go through recent amendments, and then focus on what's coming in 2025 and how we should prepare for it. Moving on to next slide. So here we see why RoHS still matters in 2025. Now let's briefly talk about why RoHS is still very important. Even though RoHS has been around for many years, it continues to be highly relevant. It's mandatory for all electrical and electronic equipment placed on the EU market. So if we are selling products into Europe, compliance is a legal requirement. There is no flexibility at all. And this does not just affect companies in the EU, it impacts the global supply chains. Even if manufacturing happens outside the Europe, as long as the product is sold in the EU, every component must comply. That means suppliers, sub-suppliers, and material providers also play a role in ensuring compliance. Another important point is the increasing focus on traceability and documentation. Authorities now expect a better transparency. It's not enough to simply say the product is compliant. We need proper technical documentation, supplier declaration, and clear evidence to support compliance. Exemption are another key factor. Many companies rely on them, but exemption are time limited and regularly reviewed. They can expire or be narrowed, so we must actively monitor them instead of assuming they will just remain valid. And finally, the risk of non-compliance is significant. It can lead to product withdrawal, penalty, shipment delays, and a reputational impact also. So overall, RoHS in 2025 is not just about meeting the limits. It's about proactive compliance management, strong supplier control, and staying updated with regulatory changes. Moving to the next slide. Here we see who will be affected by these amendments. So these amendments impact a wide range of stakeholders across the product life cycle. They affect manufacturers and brand owners who design products and place them on the market, as well as importers and EU authorized representatives who carry legal responsibility in the EU. Distributors and resellers also have obligations to ensure products they supply are compliant. The impact extends upstream to OEMs and component suppliers also, since non-compliant components can affect the entire assemblies. Internally, compliance, quality, and regulatory teams play a key role in documentation, audits, and regulatory tracking, while engineering and product design teams must consider RoHS requirements during development and redesigns. Increasingly, sustainability and ESG leadership are also involved, as RoHS supports environmental and responsible sourcing objectives. Moving next. So in this slide, we will be focusing on the RoHS directive overview. So first is a regulation. RoHS applies to any electrical and electronic equipment placed on the EU market, regardless of where the product is manufactured. The overarching objective of this directive is to prevent human health and environment by limiting the use of hazardous substances throughout the product life cycle, including manufacturing, use, and end-of-life disposal also. Then coming to substances, RoHS restrict a specific list of hazardous substances with defined maximum concentration limits. These include heavy metals such as lead, mercury, cadmium, and hexavalent chromium, which are commonly found in solders, coatings, and surface treatments. It also restricts PBB, which is a polybrominated biphenyls, and PBDE, polybrominated diphenyl ethers, which are brominated flame retardants used in plastics. In addition, 4 phthalates are there: DEHP, di2-ethylhexyl phthalate, BBP, benzyl butyl phthalate, DBP, bibutyl phthalate, and DIBP, diisobutyl phthalate, are also restricted due to their use in plasticizers in cables, connectors, and housings. These substances are particularly relevant for wire and cable assemblies. Then coming to scope, in terms of scope, RoHS applies to a broad range of electrical and electronic equipment. It includes both consumer and industrial products, as well as medical devices and monitoring and control instruments, which are added in later phases of the directive. It's important to note that RoHS does not apply only to the finished products. It also covers components and sub-assemblies, meaning a single non-compliant part can affect the compliance of an entire product. Then coming to exemptions, RoHS does not allow for certain exemptions, which are listed in Annex 3 and Annex 4 of the directive. These exemptions permit the limited use of restricted substance only when technically or scientifically viable alternatives are not available. However, exemptions are time limited. They are reviewed approximately every 18 to 24 months, and they may expire also, be narrowed, or be removed altogether. This makes exemption tracking critical, as a product relying on exemption today may become a non-compliant in future also. Moving to next. Here is the graph shows the EU RoHS 2025 limits for restricted substances. For nearly all substances including lead, mercury, hexavalent chromium, film retardants and phthalates, the limit is a 0.1% per homogeneous material. Here cadmium is the exemption with a much stricter limit of 0.01% due to its higher toxicity. The key takeaway is that RoHS compliance is mostly about managing the 0.1% threshold while giving extra scrutiny to cadmium containing materials across the supply chain. Coming next. So this is the radar chart that compares RoHS substances based on relative compliance risk and management priority. Here cadmium ranks highest, driven by its very low legal limit of 100 ppm and its high toxicity, making it the most sensitive substance to control. Next is lead and mercury, which remain high priorities due to their widespread historical use and continued exemption pressure. Hexavalent chromium shows the moderate risk, mainly linked to surface treatments and coatings. This PBB, PBDE, and phthalates present lower relative risk today, but still require tight supply declarations and material traceability. Overall, this view helps prioritize testing, supplier engagement, and redesign efforts towards the substances that pose the greatest compliance exposure. Moving forward. So we need to know, why do RoHS amendments happen? RoHS is not a static regulation. It's designed to evolve over time. One of the main drivers or reasons of our amendments is scientific risk assessment. As new scientific data becomes available, the EU reassesses the risk associated with certain substances and their impact of human health and environment. RoHS amendments also address evolving environmental and human health concerns. This includes better understanding of long-term exposure risk, environmental persistence, and end-of-life impacts of hazardous substances. Another key factor is technological feasibility. As safer alternative materials and technologies become available, regulators expect industry to adopt them. Exemptions are only justified when suitable alternatives does not yet exist. Finally, RoHS includes a regular review of exemption to ensure they remain justified. These reviews help confirm whether exemptions are still necessary or whether substitution has become technically or economically feasible. So coming to next slide. So here we see is the exemption review cycle. One of the most critical aspects of RoHS compliance is understanding that exemptions are not permanent. Many companies rely on exemption without fully realizing that they are time limited by design. Under RoHS, exemptions are typically reviewed approximately every 18 to 24 months. The year 2025 is particularly important as it includes several key exemptional reviews that may directly impact products currently on the market. So why exemption review matter is, exemption reviews are essential because they ensure the regulatory exemption for restricted or hazardous substances remain justified over time. Technology, materials, and safer alternatives evolve. So an exemption that was necessary a few years ago may no longer be appropriate today. These reviews help regulators make ensure exemptions do not become outdated. So what regulators evaluate in an exemption review is, the use of the restricted substance is still technically necessary, safer alternatives have become available, environmental and health risks can now be reduced. If these conditions have changed, exemption may no longer be considered valid. So possible outcomes of reviews is, there are three main outcomes when an exemption is reviewed. Firstly, an exemption may be renewed, often for a limited period. Second, the scope may be narrowed, meaning it may apply only to a specific application, materials, or product categories. Thirdly, and most critical, is an exemption may expire entirely. In some cases, companies may need to reapply for an exemption, but This requires stronger technical and scientific justification than before. As shown in this graphic, the exemption life cycle begins when an exemption is granted. It then enters a review period. After which the decision is made, the decision may result in the exemption being renewed, narrowed, or being expired. So this cycle repeats regularly, which means compliance today does not guarantee a compliance tomorrow. So coming next. So it's a poll time. Here is the question, and you people have 15 seconds to find the answer, and it's time to start, and let's begin. Wonderful, and thank you all for your answers. So here you can see the complete answers. And with that, I will now hand it over to my colleague who will take you through the next part of the session. Thank you.
Good day, everyone. Thank you, Pavitra, for that detailed overview. Building on that, I'll now take you through the next part, that is lead exemption revisions 2025 RoHS amendments. Before we dive into the specific exemption phase out, it is important to understand, the bigger picture of why lead-related exemptions are changed in 2025 RoHS amendments. The European Commission has tightened controls on lead use across all electrical and electronic equipment. One of the biggest shifts in 2025 is the removal of automatic renewal mechanism that many lead exemption, they relied on. This means exemption now only continuing if there is a strong newly submitted technical justification proving that no suitable alternative exists. Without this evidence, exemption move directly towards fixed expiry dates. Moving on to the timeline, we have exemption 15A, which is related to specific exemption in medical, industrial, or component level exemption, which reached its phase out in 2025. The 2025 delegated directives established firm expiry deadlines for many exemptions that previously operated under automatic renewal cycle. Hence, this exemption 15A is one of those without renewed justification and therefore expires within 12 to 18 months after December 2025 enforcement date. Next, exemption 7C2. This covers lead in dielectric ceramic materials in capacitors or related glass or ceramic uses. We'll see why it is expiring in 2026. 7C2 remains valid until December 31st, 2027. But for some specific applications, it comes earlier depending on the category. Hence, standard industry practices, they place its effective compliance deadline into 2026 for most non-extended categories. Next exemption we have is 7C1, which is a major exemption applied to lead in glass or ceramic components, which is widely used in piezo devices and sensors. And this exemption will remain in force until June 30th, 2027. After this date, only newly created, narrowly defined sub-exemptions like 7C5 to 7C6, they remain valid through December 31st, 2027. Next, exemption 7A. This is one of the most widely used exemption. Lead in high melting temperature solders with greater than 85% of lead. And this will remain in force until June 30th, 2027. And there are sub-exemptions like 7A1 to 7. They are extended, some users, till December 31st, 2027. Hence, manufacturers generally face the effective compliance transition through 2028. After these expiry dates are fully enforced. Thus, the timeline uses 2028 as the final transition period as industry shifts away from 7A. Overall, these changes show a clear push towards lead-free alternatives, more stringent documentation, and better supply chain traceability. Hence, manufacturers now need to plan earlier, review their material declarations more carefully, and prepare for upcoming lead-related expiries to stay fully compliant. Next slide. And this chart shows the remaining time before key RoHS exemption expire, measured from February 3rd, 2026. Several exemptions such as 6A and 6B1, they'll be expiring in about 311 days, making them most urgent. Others, including 6B2 and 7A, follow within roughly 500 days. The longest running exemptions like 7A1 to 7 and 7C2, they're extended to around 700 days, but still they require transition planning. The key message is that multiple exemptions expire within the next 12 to 18 months. So redesigning qualification and supplier alignment need to start now to avoid compliance risk. Next question is why this expiry matters. The EU no longer treats RoHS exemption as indefinitely renewable. Most exemptions now come with strict predefined expiry dates, and they cannot be extended unless a manufacturer submits strong technical and scientific evidence before the renewal deadlines. This shift ensures greater control, transparency, and a clear transition towards safer lead-free alternatives across the industries. Manufacturers must redesign components. As exemption deadlines approach, many traditional users of lead, such as in solder, ceramic materials, and glass components, they may no longer be legally permitted under RoHS. This forces manufacturers to redesign parts, switch to lead-free materials, and qualify alternative technologies to remain compliant. Significant impact on supply chain and BOM management. So we have to reevaluate bill of materials, BOMs. Manufacturers, must thoroughly review existing BOMs to identify components that rely on soon to expire lead exemption and determine which parts require replacements or redesign. And also it is necessary to reclassify parts under new subcategories. With updated exemption and expiry dates, components may need to be recategorized under new RoHS subcategories to ensure accurate compliance tracking and documentation. Next slide. We'll see the industries most affected. The impact of 2025 RoHS amendment, this is not uniform across all sectors. Industries such as electronics and semiconductors, these are highly exposed due to the complex materials and dense component designs. Industrial automation, medical and diagnostics equipment, they're also significantly affected, particularly because many products have long life cycles and historically relied on exemptions. We are also seeing increasing overlap with automotive electronics as vehicles become more electronically intensive and aligned with EU environmental regulations. We have supply chain pressure. One of the biggest challenges company faces is increased supply chain pressure. Organizations are they're becoming more dependent on supplier data declarations, and the quality of this data is very critical. Hence, incomplete, outdated, or inconsistent supplier information increases compliance risk and slows down the decision making. At the same time, companies are experiencing more audits, customer questionnaires, and regulatory scrutinies, all of which require accurate and traceable data. From an operational standpoint, expiring exemptions can force product redesigns even for products which is already on the market. This often leads to additional testing and requalification cost, especially for regulated products such as medical or industrial equipment. In some cases, company may face delays to EU market access while compliance issues are resolved, directly impacting revenue and customer commitments. Ultimately, non-compliance carries significant risk. Products that fail to meet RoHS requirement may be withdrawn from the EU market. Hence, companies can face fines, enforcement actions, and reputational damage, which can be far more costly than the compliance effort itself. Perhaps most importantly, repeated compliance issues can result in loss of customer trust, making it harder to compete in regulated markets. Given these impacts, the next logical question is how companies can respond effectively. So let's look at compliance strategies. Next slide. Up to this point, we have talked about regulatory changes and the risks they create. Now let's focus on how organization can respond effectively. The key message here is that RoHS compliance should be systematic and proactive, but not reactive. A strong compliance strategy starts with material transparency. Organization should, they have to move beyond eye-level declaration and adopt full material declarations, that is FMDs, especially high-risk components. FMDs provide details, substance level visibility, and this reduces uncertainty when exemption change or expire. Aligning material data with recognized standards such as IEC 62474 or relevant IPC standards, improves consistency, data quality, and audit readiness. These standards also, they make it easier to exchange data across global supply chain. The supplier management. Suppliers play a critical role in RoHS compliance. So supplier engagement must be intentional and structured. This includes updating supplier contracts and compliance clauses to clearly define RoHS obligations, data accuracy, and update timelines. Regular data refresh cycles are essentials. Compliance data should not be, treated as a one-time exercises. As materials, processes, or regulation changes, supplier data must be refreshed accordingly. It is also important to apply supplier risk segmentation, where critical suppliers such as those providing complex components or should be managed more closely than low risk suppliers. This allows team to focus on where the regulatory risk is highest. Testing and documentation. Another key question is when testing is required versus when supplier declarations are sufficient. Testing is typically needed when supplier data is incomplete or inconsistent, when there is high risk substances or exemptions are involved, when the products are subjected to regulatory scrutiny or customer audits, we need testing. Equally important is maintaining a compliant technical file. This file should include material declaration, test report, risk assessments, and exemption justifications. Exemption justification, they must be kept current. If an exemption is reviewed, narrowed, or extended, documentation, they must reflect the latest regulatory positions. Internal governance. Finally, effective governance depends on strong internal governance. There should be a cleaner ownership across compliance, quality, engineering, and sustainability teams. Everyone, they must understand their role in maintaining RoHS compliance. Organization should also establish change management processes that are directly tied to regulatory updates. That is, when exemption changes or new requirements are introduced, so those changes must trigger impact assessments, supplier updates, and design reviews when necessary. Next slide. Well, this slide shows a simple structured approach to RoHS compliance. We start by identifying all the components and materials in the product, including sub-assemblies and high-risk parts. Next, we assess where restricted substances may be present and determine whether supplier declarations are sufficient or if testing is required. Once verified, all the components evidence is checked and documented, ensuring it aligns with the current RoHS requirements and any applicable exemptions. This information is then captured in traceability records, allowing us to quickly demonstrate compliance during audits or regulatory checks. Most importantly, this is not a one-time exercise. The loop shows that compliance must be continuously reviewed as material change, supplier update data, or exemption expire. Next. Well, this slide highlights the key RoHS deadline and the actions organization, they need to take to stay compliant. Starting in 2025, updated RoHS amendment obligation came into effect for several product categories. These changes, increase expectations around substance traceability, technical documentation, and exemption review. Between 2025 and 2027, manufacturers should either finalize product redesign or submit exemption renewal when applicable. This is a critical planning window. Waiting too long increases the risk of last-minute redesigns or market delays. Hence, a key thumb rule is to act 12 to 18 months before an exemption expires. At that point, companies should have either completed design activity or confirmed their compliance path. In parallel, RoHS requires ongoing annual updates like technical files, software declarations, and supporting documentation. They must be kept current, not just during major regulatory changes. On the action side, this means strengthening supply chain and documentation process. Supplier declaration should be refreshed at least annually, and supporting evidences such as test reports and material declaration must be readily available. From a product and engineering perspective, teams need to evaluate dependency and expiring exemptions and initiate redesign where needed and requalify materials when limits change. Finally, communication and training are essential. Internal procedures should be updated, and design, procurement, and manufacturing team must be informed earlier about regulatory changes that impact their decision. Next. Yeah, turning compliance into opportunity. While RoHS is often viewed as a regulatory burden, but it can also be a real business enabler. From a business perspective, customers increasingly expect clear proof of compliance. Companies with strong RoHS programs build trust and differentiate themselves from competitors who struggle to respond to compliance requests. RoHS compliance also supports broader sustainability goals. It strengthens ESG reporting, reduces environmental impact, and aligns well with circular economy principles such as safer materials and improved recyclability. Compliance can also, drive innovations. By moving away from hazardous substances, organizations are encouraged to adopt safer materials and design products with lower life cycles and lower regulatory risk. Finally, strong compliance program, improve customer relationship, faster responses, cleaner documentation, and audit readiness. They often translate into preferred supplier status and long-term partnerships. Before we move to the next topic, next. Next slide. Before we move to the next topic, here is a quick poll. Please submit your answers within 15 seconds. Your time starts now. Yeah. Fantastic participation. Thank you. And let's jump into the next topic. Yeah. To close, here are the key messages we want you to take away from today's session. Firstly, the RoHS is not static. 2025 is a key checkpoint here with important changes around exemption, traceability, and documentation. Second, exemptions should never be treated as a permanent solutions. They are reviewed regularly and they can expire or narrow with limited notice. Third, high quality supply chain data is now a fundamental requirement. Accurate current material declaration and documentation are very essential. Fourth, organization that plan early, they can reduce the risk of last minute redesigns, market delays, and unexpected costs. And finally, when managed well, compliance is not just about avoiding penalties. It can strengthen your brand, customer trust, and competitive position. To concluding, To conclude, navigating the 2025 RoHS landscape requires awareness, preparation, and strong supplier collaboration. By staying informed, planning ahead, and building strong compliance process, your organization can move from reactive compliance to strategic advantage. Thank you for your time, attention, and engagement today. We appreciate your commitment to staying ahead of regulatory changes, and we hope this session supports you in driving compliant decision making. If you have any questions, we are happy to take them now. So we have a question. If an exemption expires in 2025, can we still sell our existing inventory after that date? Well, that's a good question. Yes, but only if that inventory was already placed, on the EU market before the exemption expired. If it is not placed on the market before the deadline, then it cannot be sold afterwards. So make sure the product enters the EU market before the exemption expires. Otherwise, it becomes non-compliant and it cannot be sold. Thanks everyone for the question. That concludes our session for today. We really appreciate your time and participation. If anything comes up later, we are always here to help. Wishing you a productive rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Impana and Pavitra. It was really an informative session. And thank you everyone for joining our webinar. We're glad you took time to learn about latest developments on EU RoHS with us. We hope you found this session insightful and gained valuable ideas. We would love to hear your thoughts, so please take 2 minutes to provide us feedback, the survey which will appear once you leave the webinar. Thank you once again.